Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 234 and it's titled 5 Color Simic. And if that title doesn't make sense, it will in just a minute. But in case you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So today, our random card was a group effort suggestion by Doodle, Mort, and Vintage over on my Discord, and that card is Overlord of the Hauntwoods. Now, a little bit of background for this. When this was suggested, the idea was that it would wind up in the cards sent out to my patrons every single month. So if you're interested in that, please do check out the Patreon, because I draw little tokens that go along with the cards. And so this would then force me to draw a land token named Everywhere. So in case you're wondering why this was a group effort, they thought this would be the most entertaining token to see drawn. In terms of the actual card itself, though, Overlord of the Hauntwoods is 3 green for a 6/5 enchantment creature avatar horror. It has impending 4 for 1 green, which means that we can cast it as an enchantment with 4 counters on it. At the end of each turn, we remove a counter, and then when it has no counters on it, it becomes a creature. And whenever Overlord of the Hauntwoods enters or attacks, create a tapped colorless land token named Everywhere that is every basic land type. So this essentially allows us to play all 5 colors in a less than 5 color deck. And considering the title of this video, you may be able to guess what color combination we are moving into. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our commander for this week and break down how exactly we intend for them to synergize. So our commander adds just 1 color, putting us in the Simic colors, and it is Nael, Avizoa Aeronaut. And she is 2 green for a 2/4 legendary creature elf scout. She's got flying and domain. So whenever Nael deals combat damage to a player, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put up to 1 of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom in a random order. Then, if you have 5 basic land types among lands you control, draw a card. So this essentially would only allow us to have X equal to 2 playing a Simic deck. We could only have islands and forests. We are not allowed to run mountains, swamps, and plains in our deck. But because of the Overlord of the Hauntwoods making a land that is all 5 basic land types on a mono green card, we can actually get Nael to trigger for X equals 5 and letting us draw a card. So there are a lot of other ways we can build around this, but I thought that this was a fun synergy and kind of a fun restriction that let us play with some very unique cards. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our themes for this week and break down what our deck is trying to do. Starting off, our first theme is one of the more obvious ones. It is domain, or there's a lot of different terms for it, but the main goal here is that we want every basic land type. So an example of what we're trying to do with that is Nishoba Brawler, which is 1 and a green for a star 3 creature cat warrior. It's got trample and domain. Nishoba Brawler's power is equal to the number of basic land types among lands you control. So again, in a normal Simic deck, this would just be a 2 mana 2/3 with trample, which is not that special. However, if we can get all 5 basic land types, which is incredibly easy, believe it or not, in mono green, and if we're adding blue, then we just get more card draw to make it even easier, then Nishoba Brawler can become a 2 mana 5/3 with trample. And it is possible for us to get this online as early as turns 2 or turn 3, and so if we can start swinging for 5 very early on in the game, we can definitely make an impact as the game goes on. Moving on to our next theme though, this one is of course turning our lands into every basic land type. We cannot always rely on having Overlord of the Hauntwoods, but luckily in green there's actually quite a few ways to get access to that swamp, plains, and mountain mana base that we're not allowed to run in Simic. And one of the good ways we can do that is Nylea's Presence, which is 1 and a green for an enchantment aura. It enchants a land. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, so it replaces itself. And Enchanted Land is every basic land type in addition to its other types. So again, this gives us all 5 basic land types, essentially immediately triggering Domain on all of our cards that care about us having Domain. And this is definitely not the only way we can do this, but it is one of the most efficient. And then, moving on to our final theme of the deck, since we care about lands, we may as well have some landfall synergies, especially because the Overlord itself is making additional lands. So we can play cards like Grappling Kraken, which is 4 blue for a 5/6 Kraken, and it has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. This is by far one of the most effective ways for us to win the game, because we can just kind of tap down our opponent's entire boards if we can get enough lands to enter the battlefield at any given time, and that's not very difficult with this deck. So it's a great way for us to close out games with some of our creatures like the Neshoba Brawler, and allows us to also tap down any flyers or reach creatures so Nael can continue to get in for combat damage. Either way though, our main goal here is to get as many lands as possible, make sure we have all 5 land types, and then just slowly outvalue the rest of the table. So those are our themes for this week, and the next thing I want to do is talk a little bit about some key cards in the deck, and these are cards that really synergize with what we're trying to do, and in some cases are win conditions or value engines all on their own. So the very first key card I want to highlight is going to be Sphinx of Clear Skies. And Sphinx of Clear Skies is 3 blue for a 5/5 Sphinx with flying and ward 2, and of course that ever lovely ability, Domain. Whenever Sphinx of Clear Skies deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put one into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So Fact or Fiction is one of my favorite cards to play in blue. It just adds a nice little mini game to the game. And Sphinx of Clear Skies being able to essentially fact or fiction every single turn when it deals combat damage means that we can essentially be drawing 2 or 3 cards every single combat, which adds on to the one we're already drawing from Nael. It adds on to some of our other card draw effects. Plus, it's just a 5/5 flyer that's hard to remove since it's got ward 2. So Sphinx of Clear Skies is a tremendous value engine, but it really needs to have that X equal to 5 if you want it to be super good. Moving on though, to our next key card. This one is Omo, Queen of Vesuva, which is 2 and a hybrid green-blue for a 1/5 legendary creature shapeshifter noble. Whenever Omo, Queen of Vesuva, enters the battlefield or attacks, put an everything counter on each of up to 1 target land and up to 1 target creature. Each land with an everything counter on it is every land type in addition to its other types, and each non-land creature with an everything counter on it is every creature type. Now, this does not say every basic land type, so while we will still get the forest, island, swamp, plains, and mountain, we will also get some additional non-basic land types, things like cave, desert, Urzas. So this is a very unique card, and it's very powerful in the deck to be able to turn multiple of our lands into those everything lands, because then if someone has a way to remove 1 or 2 lands, we will most likely still have a backup, and we don't really care about a lot of the shapeshifter abilities being able to turn creatures into every creature type, but who knows, maybe sometimes that will also come in handy. Anyway though, that is only our second key card, so moving on to our third key card. This one is Collective Restraint, and this is 3 and a blue for an enchantment. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays X for each creature attacking you, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So again, we will very consistently have 5 basic land types. So if someone has to pay 5 mana for every single creature that attacks us, it is very unlikely that we will be getting attacked as long as this enchantment remains in play. Because if someone goes wide enough to kill us with their creatures, then they probably can't pay to attack us with all of those creatures. And if someone is going super tall and building up one giant creature, they kind of have to spend their entire turn just paying to attack us, and then there's still a chance we have things like blockers or removal, so it's a very tricky proposition for our opponents, but it puts us in a very safe and protected position where we can kind of just ride out what's happening with the rest of the table and slowly accrue value with things like Nael and the Sphinx of Clear Skies. That, though, is the end of our key cards section for today. And moving on to the next piece of this deck tech, I want to take a second to highlight some of the cool interactions that are in this deck. And these are cards that really work well together, and in a lot of cases are just kind of fun cards that I want to highlight. So the first cool interaction I want to talk about is between Avenger of Zendikar and Doppelgang. Avenger of Zendikar, kind of a staple in Landfall decks. It is 5 green for a 5/5 elemental. When it enters, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control. Then it has Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So if we have these 7 lands needed to cast the Avenger, then we would make 7/0/1 plants, we could play a land, and now we have 7/1/2 plants, and they can slowly get out of hand from there. Where it really starts to go a little wild, though, is with Doppelgang, which is a card that I absolutely love. I've been trying to put it in pretty much every Simic-based deck that I build at this point. It is XXX green-blue for a sorcery that says for each of X target permanents, create X tokens that are copies of that permanent. So if X is equal to 1, essentially we've spent 5 mana on Doppelgang, we get to make 1 token copy. That's already not that bad. That is a 5 mana Avenger of Zendikar if the Avenger is in play. Where it really starts to get crazy, though, is we can actually target lands with Doppelgang, meaning that if we can get X to, say, 3, then we can target the Avenger and 2 lands, making 3 copies of each of them. So we would get an additional 6 lands entering the battlefield and an additional 3 Avenger of Zendikars entering the battlefield. We can also stack our triggers in a way that all of the Avengers would make the plant tokens before they put counters on them for the 6 lands that just entered. So if we had those initial 7 lands, then we would get 6 more lands. We would make, 13 total plants per Avenger, so that winds up being 39 total plants, and each plant is going to be getting 6 counters on it. So that is 39 6/7 power worth of creatures, and I really wish they weren't that number, but we're here now. So Avenger of Zendikar and Doppelgang, phenomenal cards together, and absolutely perfect for what we're trying to do. Moving on to our next cool interaction, though, this one is going to be between Springheart Nantuko and Lotus Cobra. So Springheart Nantuko, 1 and a green for a 1/1 enchantment creature insect monk, and it has Bestow for 1 and a green. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 and a green if Springheart Nantuko is attached to a creature you control. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature. If you didn't create a token this way, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. So this could go on any creature we control, and we've already talked about some really good creatures that could be enchanted with this. Things like the Sphinx of Clear Skies, things like the Avenger of Zendikar, but one of the best cards to put this on is Lotus Cobra, because Lotus Cobra is 1 and a green for a 2/1 snake, and it has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. So if we have a single Lotus Cobra, we play a land, we get to make 1 mana. However, if it's enchanted by the Springheart Nantuko, we would also get a trigger to pay 2 and make a token copy of the Lotus Cobra. If we only have the 1 Cobra, then we only get 1 mana, we still gotta pay the extra 1. After that, though, it turns into pure profit, because if we have 2 Lotus Cobras, they will both make a mana, which can immediately be used to copy it with Springheart Nantuko, and then every subsequent land we play after that only gives us more and more mana. So it's not beyond the realm of possibilities that we just make, say, 5 land drops in a turn and make just an absurd amount of mana and then dump it into something like Doppelgang and just absolutely steamroll the rest of the table because we've made 15 copies of 15 total permanents. And at that point, what are our opponents really going to do to stop us? Anyway, though, those are all of our cool interactions for this week. And of course, the last piece of our deck tech is to talk about the price of the deck. And today, our total deck price came in at $83.05, with our namesake card, the Overlord of the Hauntwoods, being the most expensive card in the deck at $12.46. Now, normally, I would advocate for taking out the most expensive card if you need to cut down on budget. However, it's hard to recommend cutting out the card that we have built around, as well as a card that can create those everywhere lands, because even though it is quite easy to do in green, it's not exactly a common effect. We can still find the creatures and find the enchantments and find the lands to do it, but it's not going to be incredibly easy if we start trimming down on those pieces. So I would highly recommend you keep the Overlord in the deck. It's a phenomenal engine. It's a great win condition. It is very expensive, but I do think it's worth it. On the other hand, if you're looking for a card to put into the deck that's a little bit outside of our budget range, I have a suggestion for you there as well, and the card I would recommend putting in this week is going to be Genji Glove, which looks a little bit weird, but bear with me and I'll explain why. It is 5 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has double strike, and whenever it attacks, if it's the first combat phase of the turn, untap it. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase, then it equips for 3. Now, we're not exactly a Voltron-style deck. We're not exactly focused on hitting people with our commander and knocking them out with our commander damage, but Nael does have an ability that triggers on combat damage. So if we can give her double strike and take an additional combat step, that means Nael is hitting someone 4 total times. And if we are triggering Nael 4 times, we are looking at the top 20 cards of our library and putting 4 of them into our hand. That is an incredibly powerful effect that even though we may not be dealing a ton of damage, we are putting ourselves so far ahead of the rest of the table that it's going to be next to impossible for them to stop us, especially when you consider that we're in Simic. We have a ton of ways to protect ourselves, we have counter spells, we've got ways to keep our creatures safe. It is difficult to stop this deck once it gets rolling. The only trick is going to be getting that engine started. Now, on the other hand, if you are putting a card into the deck, like Genji Glove, you do also have to take a card out of the deck, and this was a tough one because I didn't want to recommend taking out any cards that cared about having multiple land types. With that being said, though, Stratodon is just not good. It is 10 mana for a 5/5 artifact creature with trample, and it costs 1 less to play for each basic land type among lands you control. So that's awesome. We can make this cost 5 less, and then it's just a 5 mana 5/5 with trample, which is still not good. So as much as I wanted to keep every domain and basic land type matters card in the deck, I can't in good conscience recommend keeping Stratodon because you are very rarely going to want to play it, and it's very rarely going to make an impact. So if you can, switch in Genji Glove. I think it would be much more efficient and technically the same price. So with that being said, though, that brings us to the end of our deck tech for today. And before we jump into a game with this deck, I do want to take a second to highlight how you can support the channel if that's something you're interested in doing. As always, you can just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That is amazing, and it really does help out a lot, and thank you so much to everyone who has already done so. But if you want to go a little bit above and beyond and join this amazing group of people over on our Patreon or right here on YouTube as a channel member, then you can find us there as well, and you can get access to the deck lists a week early. You can get access to a Discord where we brew up a lot of the decks and also play the games that appear on the channel. Plus, it's just an awesome community, if I'm being perfectly honest. I get that I'm biased, but I really enjoy it. And then a bunch of other stuff as well, like the cards sent to you every single month, as I mentioned earlier. With that being said, though, let's move on from our self-shoutouts and actually get into our game, see how Nael can perform. So today, we have a bit of a rough table ahead of us, because we have Vivi Ornithir being played by Bilal, Annick, Hand of Erebos, being played by Jason, and the Gitrog Monster being played by Shawn. Now, I have played against all of these commanders except for Vivi, and Annick and the Gitrog Monster are very powerful in the hands of Jason and Shawn. I've specifically played against both of their builds of these decks before. What I haven't played against is Vivi. However, that being said, I've played against Vivi in Standard quite a bit, and I know the power of this card. And Bilal, very well known for being a combo player at our table, and Vivi is kind of just like the poster child for combo at this point. So I am very concerned about what Bilal and Vivi are bringing to the table, and hopefully we're able to deal with Vivi in things like counterspells and removal. And if we can just kind of keep Vivi off the board, my hope is that we won't be able to get run over super early on and can build up enough defenses to fight back. Moving on to Annick, though. This is Jason's enchantment/reanimator list, and I know that it is a very powerful deck, but it does take a little while to get set up, so I am hoping that the time he takes to get set up is the time that we can also take to get set up, and then hopefully we can just control the board a little bit more than maybe he's able to add to it, but we'll see how that one goes. And then last but not least, we have Shawn and his Gitrog Monster deck. This deck is a bit of a boogeyman at our table. It is not CEDH by any stretch of the means, but it is pretty much as close as you're going to get at a casual table. It is very likely that this deck can win as soon as it untaps with its commander. So the Gitrog Monster is definitely one of those cards that cannot be allowed to stick around, because he will accrue a tremendous amount of value, just draw a ton of cards, get a ton of land drops, and then probably find some way with something like Underrealm Lich to just win the game. So overall, a very scary pod this week, but I am very excited to see what it can do. I'm kind of hoping our opponents just pick each other off and leave our little uncommon commander left on our own to, set up and hopefully win the game. So we'll see how it goes. Let me know down in the comments if you have any predictions for this game. Let me know who you think might walk out the winner. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. I hope you will enjoy the game. I'm sure I certainly will. And I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Bilal goes first, followed by myself, Jason, and then Shawn. On Bilal's first turn, he plays a Temple of Mystery, scrying 1. I play a Desert of the Mindful. Jason plays a Vault of Champions. Shawn plays a Forest and casts Elvish Mystic. Bilal plays a Mountain and casts the Emperor of Palimaceia, putting a +1/+1 counter on it whenever he casts a non-creature spell with mana value 4 or greater. I play a Forest and cast Mask of Avacyn. Jason plays a Forest and casts Jukai Naturalist, making his enchantment spells cost 1 less to cast. Shawn plays a Forest and casts Arbor Elf, which can tap to untap target forest. Bilal plays a Sulphur Falls, then casts his commander, Vivi Ornithir, which gets a +1/+1 counter and deals a damage to each opponent whenever he casts a non-creature spell, and it can be activated for 0 mana once on his turn to create red or blue mana equal to Vivi's power. Once that's resolved, he casts Infuriate, giving Vivi +3/+2 until the end of turn, putting a counter on Vivi and doing 1 damage to each opponent. Then he can activate Vivi to make 4 mana to cast Archmage Emeritus, now drawing a card whenever he casts or copies an instant or sorcery. At the end of turn, Shawn casts Summoner's Pact, searching his library for a green creature card, specifically Birds of Paradise, putting it into his hand. On my turn, I play a forest and cast Omo, Queen of Vesuva, putting an everything counter on one of my forests when it enters, making it every land type. Jason plays a Brushland and casts Putrefy, destroying Bilal's Vivi. He then attacks Shawn for 2 with the Naturalist, gaining 2 life since the Naturalist has lifelink. In Shawn's upkeep, he's forced to pay 4 mana for Summoner's Pact so that he doesn't lose the game. After that, he plays a Prismatic Vista, immediately sacrificing it and losing a life to search his library for a swamp, putting it into play. Bilal plays a Storm-Carved Coast and casts Thunderclap Drake, making his instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast. Then he moves to combat and attacks Jason for 2 with Archmage Emeritus. On my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Shawn for 1 with Omo, putting an everything counter on my other forest. Then, in my second main phase, I cast Sunbathing Rootwalla, which lets me pay 4 mana to give it +1/+1 for each basic land type I control, which is currently 5 thanks to Omo. On Jason's turn, he casts Nature's Lore, searching his library for a forest, specifically an Indatha Triome, putting it into play. Shawn plays a forest and casts his commander, the Gitrog monster, letting him play an additional land each turn, forcing him to sacrifice a land in his upkeep, and drawing a card whenever a land is put into his graveyard from anywhere. This lets him play a Ghost Quarter, and then he casts Birds of Paradise. On Bilal's turn, he cast a Coruscation Mage, paying its offspring cost to also create a 1/1 token copy of it. Both of the otters now do 1 damage to each opponent whenever he casts a non-creature spell. On my turn, I simply equip Mask of Avacyn to Omo, giving her +1/+2 in hexproof, then pass. Jason casts a Soul Ring and then uses that to cast Victor, Valgavoth's Seneschal, triggering his ability whenever an enchantment enters under his control, surveilling 2 the first time it resolves, making each opponent discard a card the second time, and then returning a creature from a graveyard to the battlefield under his control the third time it resolves. After that, he cast Familiar Ground, preventing his creatures from being blocked by more than 1 creature and triggering Victor, so he surveils 2. In Shawn's upkeep, he sacrifices a forest, drawing a card with the Gitrog monster, then plays a Field of Ruin and a tapped Overgrown Tomb. After that, he casts an Elves of Deep Shadow, and at the end of turn, Bilal cast Pongify, destroying the Gitrog monster and replacing it with a 3/3 Ape token. This does 2 damage to each of Bilal's opponents, and he draws a card. In response, Shawn sacrifices both his Ghost Quarter and Field of Ruin to draw 2 cards, destroy Bilal's Storm-Carved Coast and Sulphur Falls, and letting each player search their libraries for a basic land, putting it into play, while Bilal searches for an additional basic land, putting that into play as well. Still at the end of turn, Bilal casts a Psychotic Fury, giving the Emperor double strike until the end of turn, drawing 2 cards and doing 2 more damage to each opponent. On Bilal's turn, he plays an island and recasts his commander Vivi, but at the end of turn, Shawn casts Abrupt Decay, once again destroying Vivi. On my turn, I cast my commander, Nael Avizoa Aeronaut, which lets me look at the top 5 cards of my library, putting 1 back on top, the rest on the bottom, and drawing a card whenever she deals combat damage to an opponent, since I control 5 basic land types. Jason cast a Sigil of the Empty Throne, now making a 4/4 Angel token whenever he casts an enchantment, also triggering Victor, so he surveils 2. Shawn recast his commander, the Gitrog monster, then also cast Llanowar Elves and a Boreal Druid. Bilal plays a mountain and then casts Stormcatch Mentor, making his instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. This allows him to cast Temporal Manipulation, taking an extra turn after this one, drawing a card, and doing 2 damage to each opponent. Once that resolves, he casts Curiosity, enchanting Coruscation Mage, so that he can draw a card whenever it deals damage to an opponent, essentially allowing him to draw 3 cards every time it triggers. This also does 2 more damage to each opponent on cast. Bilal then passes to himself and casts a Witness Protection, enchanting the Gitrog monster, turning it into a 1/1 with no abilities, doing 2 damage to each opponent and drawing 3 cards. He then plays an island and casts Expropriate, doing 2 damage to each opponent, drawing 4 cards, and making each player vote to either give Bilal an extra turn or control of one of their permanents. When we vote, Bilal votes to give himself an extra turn, while the rest of us vote to give him a permanent, letting him gain control of a land for each of us. Once that's resolved, Bilal once again passes to his next extra turn and plays a mountain before casting Omniscience, now letting him cast spells from his hand for free. This also does 2 damage to each opponent and draws him 3 cards. At this point, Bilal can draw 3 cards and do 2 damage every time he casts a non-creature spell, which he can do for free with Omniscience, so we all decide to concede rather than making him go through the motions to eliminate us, winning Bilal the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely a very fast game, as I kind of expected it would be, but we got a little unlucky. We definitely got stuck on lands. I kept a 3-land hand in the hopes that we could hit 4 so we could cast Nael and then start churning through our deck to find the lands we needed, especially because I also had Omo in my starting hand, so I knew we could be triggering Nael for 5 every turn, and then we just never drew that 4th land, and eventually we got it thanks to Shawn. But at that point, it was far too late, so a little unfortunate for our deck. I think that if we'd been able to hit those land drops, I think we could have done some really cool things, but unfortunately, it just wasn't our week. Moving around the table to Jason, he was definitely getting Anakthea set up, and he was very much ready to start taking over the game, but once again, he just couldn't quite do it fast enough. He also struggled with mana a little bit very early on, and then once he did catch up, he got a lot of his pieces down very quickly, but he unfortunately did not get to untap with them. Continuing around the table to Shawn, he got pretty much every mana dork in his deck on the board. He kind of like flooded, but with creatures, which is a very unique thing to have happen. And even though he was able to stick Gitrog for a single turn cycle, he wasn't able to keep it for much longer after that. And so Bilal and Shawn kind of got into a bit of a war over their commanders, and unfortunately Shawn was on the losing end of that one, considering Bilal had some more instant speed interaction. And then, of course, last but not least, our winner of the game, Bilal. A huge congratulations goes out to him. Definitely seeing the power of Vivi, even when Vivi isn't in play, is very impressive. The fact that he was able to stack up a ton of cheapening effects, I'm not quite sure what they're called, but the cost reducers that let his instants and sorceries cost less mana, meant that he was very easily able to play some very big spells and just run away with the game, especially once you start taking 2 extra turns in a row. It's very tough to lose. So I was very impressed with the engine that Bilal was able to create, even without Vivi. So hopefully we'll be able to see Vivi again in the future, and this time I know that there's more to be a threat in that deck than just Vivi. So thank you all so much for watching. I had a great time with this game and with this deck. I hope you all did as well. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really helps out a lot, and I really do appreciate it. So with all that being said, if you've got any other suggestions, please put them in the comments, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.